How do? So you fancy making a guitar neck but think it's maybe a little bit tricky, or you need lots of specialist equipment and jigs and things like that? No, you don't really. If you've done a little bit of woodworking before, you can make a guitar neck very easily. Simple tools, simple designs. Let's just see how it's done. Hi, I'm Chris. Welcome to King Bespoke Creations. Now then, making a guitar neck. Lots of people think you've got to use a jig, something like this. I actually made this from a neck, so you can make your own. But lots of people think you need to have one of those and then you need to copy it with a great big power router and all the rest of it. It's not true. You can actually just get a lump of wood and cut the shape out that you want. If you've already got a guitar, take measurements off that. If you haven't, well then we'll go through a few of those in today's video. So make sure we're watching, get a little notepad out. So that leads us into what wood should we use? Obviously there's the kind of two standards of maple and mahogany, but they're not the only woods that we can use. You can actually make a neck out of almost anything. Hey, go and watch Chris Franklyn's YouTube channel. He made a guitar neck out of chipboard and OSB. Seriously. The last neck I made for the Great Guitar Build Off was actually from a big oak plank like this, 25mm thick, and just cut the shape out that you want. Any hardwood will do. It really doesn't matter. You're going to put a truss rod in there, it's going to be strong enough. Let me show you the wood that we're going to use for today. So I bought this pack of maple sticks basically from eBay, really cheap, and I've pulled out two lengths that I'm going to use. Yes, two lengths. So one of these sticks on its own isn't big enough to build a neck. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, surely if you're going to glue two pieces of wood together, that's not going to be as strong. That's not true. Actually, that joint will make it even stronger. Wood glue is stronger than the wood itself. We also have the fact that then those two pieces of wood will have grains running in fractionally different directions, giving it more strength as they fight against each other. It's going to work in our favour. So this maple isn't your AAA grade quilted flamed extra specially with glitter jazz maple as we would normally kind of find on a lot of the posh end guitars, but I have found, rummaging through the pack, I found these two that have some spalting on them. Now spalting is where the wood started to get a little bit of infection in there, but has since dried off and has died, and it gives us this kind of textured look to it. I'm going to actually work this in my favour, probably working those the other way around so they fit together better. So I'm going to put these together like this, and I'm going to try and keep this, because it's only really thin, it's not going very deep into the wood at all. I'm going to try and keep some of this colour on the back of the headstock. So the rest of the neck will be nice and clean and crisp like maple usually is, but the back of the headstock's just going to have this extra little texture to it, which I think will look really cool. It will also fit in with the rest of the guitar design, which you're going to have to watch for in the upcoming videos. So make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the little notification bell thingamajig so you don't miss out. Okay, so what dimensions do we need for the neck? Well, I've got a little jig here so I can take it off this. If you don't have one, write these measurements down. This maple is 22mm thick. I wouldn't go any thinner than that, so 22 to 25mm thick for your neck blank. The distance of the actual neck from where the heel sits all the way up to where the nut is, that is approximately 47 centimeters or 18.5 inches depending on where you live. The headstock, well, when you're designing your own headstock, you can have whatever size you want. This Fender style headstock at the top, you're going to need to have a good 20 centimeters or 8 inches, again depending on where you live. Now obviously when we glue these two pieces together, this line will become the center line of the neck. We want to try and make sure that that's nice and central. It's going to look better as we work through. Now we could put a thin strip of something else in the middle of there as a contrast, which is a very common thing to do, with different coloured wood down the middle. I'm not going to do that on this occasion. So the total length of my neck blank is going to be 68 centimeters, or about 26 3/4 inches, and that should give me the full length I need to cut out a neck. One neck blank ready for use. Really enjoying this on the back. Okay, so now to start putting some lines on it. Firstly, I've put a line down here for where the nut's going to go. So then, how thick do we do the neck at the top and the bottom? Well, standard size, if you're going to use a pre-slotted nut like this, just a thin one, looks very, very similar to the Fender style, the way that they do the nets. That is 42mm, and that's what I'm going to work to today. You can, of course, also get solid nut blanks that you'd have to cut your own grooves on. Depending on what you want to do and how much you want to get invested in it, they're perfectly useful as well. So we're going 42mm wide there, and heading down to about 55mm at the heel end back here. So now I can measure off that 42mm. If you don't have a center finding ruler, get yourself one, because they're super useful. In fact, I'll put a link in the description so you can grab one. You obviously don't have to have one of these, specialist equipment and all that, but just really useful for everyday stuff. Right, so the headstock design then, how are we going to do this? Well, it's predominantly worked on where the pegs need to be for your string tuners. Now, if you've got a jig, that would be really simple to lay that on, put the dots on for where the holes need to be, and then sketch whatever you need around that. But I don't have one of those, so I'm going to show you how I do it. I'm going to do a reverse headstock, so I'm going to have 6 in a line, but they're on the bottom rather than on the top. With the nut in place, I can mark off on the wood where each string is going to sit. Once I've done that, I'm going to use a combination square, put the pencil on one of those dots, it doesn't matter which one to begin with, and slide that up so that it fits to there. And once that's locked off, then it's just a simple matter of running your line across, and do the same with each string. Once we have these where the string markings are going to be, then we can just go up from whatever angle you set for the bottom or for the edge, and the center of each post is about 15mm from the edge. So we just mark off 15mm at the bottom end, 15mm at the top end, and draw a line between the two. This diagonal line that we've just put in is your center of each post, each tuning post, and we want the top of that post to run in line with the top of the string. So each of them will sit something like that. So work that out all the way through, and that's where your pegs need to sit. So there we go, something like that, I think. So straight line up here, a little bit of a curve, and a hint at my 3-pointed crown on the top, without going to excesses, and then still lots of space here to put logos and writings and whatever else you might want to put on yours. Now, before we cut the shape out, there's one more thing that we can look at first, depending on how you're going to do it, and that's to cut the truss rod channel. So without using any fancy jigs, a power router is a very simple way of cutting out a channel. If you have a power router and you've got a fence, then a 6mm bit inside, using the fence along this nice straight edge, we can then cut the channel smack down the middle at the length of that truss rod. Now, you might not have a power router or a fence for that router or a 6mm bit, Or like me, you just don't like them because they're noisy and dusty. So there is another way. Yes, the other way is to just use a chisel. Now, a lot of people think this is a skill that's then handed down through generations and it's really difficult. Wrong. It's dead simple. It's the same thickness, the same width as the truss rod at 6mm. And how deep do we go? Well, the same depth as the truss rod. How am I going to make sure I don't go any deeper? By putting some masking tape on it. There is my depth stop. Really, really simple. All I'm going to do is mark off with a pencil where the end of that truss rod channel needs to be. The adjustment end just sits just underneath the nut. Now to mark off where to follow with the chisel, all I'm going to do is put the chisel on the center line and mark off with a little pencil where one edge needs to be. It doesn't need to be both edges, so I'll do that at both ends and then connect the dots. You only ever need to lightly tap a sharp chisel. It should always be sharp. So I'm now on the end of where the truss rod sits and I'm in line on this side with the big long edge that I drew on. Notice that the chamfer is facing the cut that I want to do, and a light tap. Move it back a millimetre, tap again, and just keep doing that. It doesn't need to be heavy. Light taps all the time, and you'll just find every time you do that the chisel will go a little bit further down without having any more pressure. After a while you might be able to get some of those up. We'll come back and finish this end off later on, but basically do that all the way through, making sure that again we don't allow the masking tape to sink. So heading back to where we started, we're just going to go in from the other end. As we graduated our way in, we just tidy it up as we finish the other end. And then whichever way you've cut your truss rod channel, whether that's with a power outer or not, at the adjustment end it will always need widening out a little bit, and you're going to do that with a chisel. One truss rod inserted, pretty much flush with the top. It's a fraction lower than the edge, just so it doesn't get in the way of gluing the fretboard on, but it wants to be as close to the top as possible. Right, so now we get to the fun bit of cutting out the shape from the standard neck blank. Now there's a number of different ways that you can do this. One of them is with a bandsaw, which makes it super easy. Even a small little hobby one like that one will work perfectly well. If you don't have a bandsaw, well then you could use a handsaw if you wanted to. For the cornered sections you could use a coping saw, or you can use my favourite stop cut and chisel technique. So what is the stop cut technique, I hear you cry? Well, very simple. You saw down in chunks all the way along and then chip in from the edge using a chisel. So this is where we find something interesting. So by doing this chip, it means we understand exactly what the grain's doing. we can see here that as I've chipped it, each time it's sloped down as it's come through. That's because that's where the grain's running and that's where it splits. The stop cuts guarantee that isn't going to continue any further than I want it to. So always start chipping halfway through your wood, and then you'll see which direction it wants to work. Can I go lower than that? Yeah, a little bit, because that'll come down to there. Whichever technique you use, always make sure you're only going down to the pencil line. Don't get rid of your pencil line. Leave that for finer work with either a plane or a spoke shave or a sander, whichever technique you want to use. But keep that pencil line for as long as you can. So because the grain of the wood in this piece isn't really playing ball, I'm going to play safe and head to the bandsaw to just cut the rest of this out in a rough manner. There we go. So a quick rip through with the bandsaw gets us to that. So you can see we're not all the way up to the pencil line. There's a little bit of room there, so we can smooth that off, make sure it's clean and crisp. It's time to think about the fretboard. Now, lots of people do this in a different order. I don't think it makes any difference to the quality of the guitar. It's just a preference on how you work. Here's my fretboard blank. It's a nice lovely chunk of Marante with beautiful patterns in. I like to glue the fretboard onto the neck, and then I know how thick I can make the entire neck as a whole, rather than guesstimating what my final measurements might be. Then I can work on the actual fretboard itself. So I'll leave that till last. I know other people like to do the fret slots and even put in frets into the fretboard while it's just like that. It's not how I like to do it. I think it's too thin, it's too much like bending. So I like to glue it all onto the neck, then work on the neck profile, then we'll sort the frets out afterwards. The section I want, bit of overhang on both sides and at both ends as well, and then just draw around that with my pencil. Now I like to put some masking tape over the top of the truss rod, just a real thin strip of it. Some people don't like to, they don't think it's necessary. I really want to make sure that no glue goes down into that cavity. So I'll put some on and then trim it so it's really nice and thin all the way down. There we go. So now when we put glue on here, there's more than enough glue surface area for the board, and I'm guaranteed it's not going to slip down and start interfering with the truss rod. Now, there's a few different options for radiusing a fretboard. One of them is to build a massive elaborate jig and use a huge router that goes over and over and over and over, but we don't want to be messing with that. Other options that you have are a sanding block that has a radius predetermined in it. So this is a 9.5 inch radius. So all you're going to do is stick some sandpaper to that and work backwards and forwards forever and a day until it's got the radius that you want. But you know that's going to work. So if you can get your hands on one of these, it's a guaranteed result, however long and tedious that might be. My preferred method is to use hand planes. Now you can just use a standard size number 4 if that's all you have. If you've got a great big long plane, then use one. That's going to give you just an easier, flatter surface, but honestly you can do it just as well with a standard number 4. So I've planed off this center section completely perfectly flat, nice and straight all the way through. So now I'm going to draw a center line down the middle of this fretboard that I do not want to make disappear. So the radius I'm going to put in using the plane. I'm going to try and make sure I don't get rid of this pencil line down the middle. Now I've drawn on the radius on the ends there, which I can then follow down the side of the fretboard. Mark that off using one of these, a radius marking tool. If you don't have one, draw a radius on a circle the size that you want, cut it out. And there we go. So we've checked along straight that it's not dished or bowed at all along both edges and still down the middle. We have a compound radius, so we've got a 14 at the end, a 15 smack in the middle, and a 16 down at the heel end. And what a beautiful piece of wood it is. Now comes the fun bit. So now we're going to cut out the profile on the back of the neck. So you see on the headstock here, I've connected these curves. That will create effectively the volute, but it's where the headstock's going to stay flat at that point, and then that's going to slope into the next profile, the neck profile from here. This end, this is where the body's going to attach. So I need to slope down from there to the neck profile. And then on the edges, to begin with, we just need to work out the thickness that we want, which at the first fret is about 21 mil. And then coming back down towards the heel where we're going to go for 24 mil. So I'm going to draw a line between the two and then get rid of all of this excess here. Then we can start shaping. Okay, so we've removed the bulk of all that waste material now. So we've now got an overall thickness here of 21 and here of 24, and it's flat in the middle. Now we're going to round this over by using flat lines. It's clever, isn't it? So we have our center line here. What we're going to do is half the distance between the center line and the edge, and half the distance between the top, and I'm going to go to about the fretboard and half that distance there. Do the same at the other end, connect the two, get rid of that waste. So that gets us this chamfer. That's one of them done. Next is to have a central point in there and a central point between the two there, and get rid of that lot. And from this half line to a new half line here, keep going like that until the entire lot is round. And there we go. By the time you've taken every corner off, slightly less each time, you end up with a beautiful round neck. Now obviously one of the bonus points of making your own neck is you can make it to suit yourself. So you can take a little bit more off here or a little bit less off there, or you can leave it where it is. I'll leave a link in the description for how to do an asymmetrical neck where the peak is offset. using exactly the same technique but just altering the lines. I'll leave the link for that video down in the description. Well, hello. Only a few bits left to go. It's looking good. So the two main things that we need to do to finish off are slope the back of the headstock into the neck profile and thin out the headstock and create a slope on this side, and then drill a hole to get into that truss rod. So let's crack on and do those. I'm going to use some chisels, certainly to get rid of the bulk of this waste here. But this is what I wanted to stress. It doesn't matter which tool you use. Now that might sound a bit silly, but it's absolutely true. I like using hand tools, chisels, rasps, things like that, rather than power tools. But you might not. You might not have a lot of chisels. You might just have a belt sander. Or maybe you've got a Dremel with a little sanding disc on the end. It doesn't matter what tool you use. The techniques are the same for carving each part of this neck. And there we have one nicely graded in back of headstocks. That feels really nice. Hands up there where you'd be playing your chords, it just fits lovely. It's really nice. Right, so then one of the last things then is just to thin this headstock down to about 15mm is the standard. So we're going to cut that off this edge, so that needs to go. Again, there's a number of different ways you can do it, whether that's handsaw, bandsaw, or great big sander forever and a day. It's entirely up to you. So just make sure at this point where we have our 15mm line, we're going to get rid of this area. Make sure you give yourself space to grade that up again. So kind of like the same way we've done here, you're going to do the same thing at this point. So figure out where your nut is, and then we can cut that excess bit of fretboard down there, curving in to match that. Then all you can do is you can cut straight into there, and then as you cut in from the end, that's going to chip off from there, so that's all that disappeared, and then we can curve that section off with the chisel or sander or whatever you used for this part. Do it exactly the same way. So before I can start carving this away to smooth all of this out, I'm going to mark off precisely where the nut's going to sit. So I've still got my center line down the middle of the fretboard. So using one of these to make sure I get completely square, so really light. Always do first cuts super light, and then you can get deeper. So there we go, one finished headstock. Well, nearly finished. We need to drill a hole. Without doubt, this is the scariest bit for me. It always is. Drilling a hole to try and find where that truss rod head is. I've tried to think of a better way of doing this time and time again, and I can't think of one. So grab yourself a drill, roughly find out in the middle, make a hole. Well, there we go, one fully finished neck. Obviously without the frets in. That's going to be a separate video altogether because I'm going to do a little bit of inlaying stuff on there. So we'll show you how to do that and put the frets on and give it a level and a polish and a crown and all those kind of things in a separate video. But this is a finished, fully carved neck. Hopefully through there you've seen how easy it can be. And again, it doesn't matter what tools you use. You can go and buy great big expensive tools, lots of jigs all over the place, or you can grab something simple. I like using hand tools, chisels, rasps, files, that kind of thing. You might want to do it all with power tools using bandsaws, belt sanders. So again, I got the belt sander out on there just to show that it still works just as well. It's entirely up to you. So make sure you click that subscribe button, ring the notification bell thingamajig just to make sure you catch the updates on this neck. And then more importantly, the body that this is going to be attached to, which is going to be something a little bit special, coming out quite soon. We've got other projects coming up soon. We've got base builds to do, and there's going to be lots of other tips and tricks. A little bit of a question and answer thing coming up as well. So make sure you stay in touch and you keep watching out for the videos here on YouTube. Until next time, sharpen your tools. God bless. Bye-bye.